One Australian who first came to China in the 1960s has observed China's progress over the past half-century. Professor Colin Mackerras argues that China's rise from an agrarian backwater to the world's second-largest economy was peaceful and built on the tenacity of the Chinese people. Earlier, I spoke with Professor Colin Mackerras, Sinologist and Emeritus Professor at Griffith University in Australia, to dive into the roots of Chinese culture to find out why China sees international harmony as the future. There are those, skeptics who say, well, past doesn't predict the future. You cannot say because you have a track record that you won't do something. And honestly, if you extrapolate in that way, of course, we cannot promise what we cannot do in the future. But you have said in the Chinese culture, we value international harmony, and you say conquest.
I have said that, and that's what I think.
Yeah. Help us understand from the perspective of the Chinese culture, why does China have a culture of respecting international harmony?
Well, I mean, I think it's partly based on Confucianism, which emphasizes harmony, and that's not the only thing, of course, but I think that Chinese culture in general has been harmonious, and if you look at the other streams of philosophy, like Taoism, for example, there's a whole lot of them in Chinese culture. But I mean, you asked me to talk about Chinese culture in that respect, and I think it is harmonious. I think it does bend towards harmony. And I mean, one very, very specific example. In the 15th century, both China and the West, Europe, sent out, they sent out fleets, like the fleet of Zhenghe in the 1420s.
Right.
And then, of course, we know about Columbus and so on. But when Columbus went to America, within a few decades, there was conquest. Not for China. China didn't try to conquer anybody. It's never tried to conquer anybody. So, I mean, I just think that idea of the aggressive China is just nonsense. And I think it should be, we should get over it. China is not aggressive. Now, if you want to talk about Taiwan, I mean, a lot of people have said, oh, what about Taiwan? They're going to try and send troops and so on into Taiwan. But I mean, what I got from Xi Jinping's speech, he's very clear that he wants a peaceful reunification. He's very clear, okay, Taiwan, he reckons, is part of China's territory. And you can look at numerous international documents. Taiwan is, when it was a member of the United Nations, it represented China, not Taiwan. It's never been independent. Well, not recently. I mean, it hasn't been. It's been a part of China and recognized as part of China. And I think it should become, it is part of China.
He also mentioned, when it comes to Taiwan, he mentioned that China's action, any action, is not targeting the common compatriots, the people in Taiwan.
Right.
It's targeted against those external forces who are trying to split Taiwan from China, or those who are on the island who are trying to. What do you think of the emphasis? Because this is the very first time that he made this very, very clear.
Well, I mean, I think that emphasis is rational and reasonable, and I also think that Taiwan. What I fear about the future of Taiwan is that the Americans are trying to stir up the independence thinking, and I mean, Nancy Pelosi, when she went there, she tried to stir up the independence thinking. She addressed them as a nation and said, we're going to defend you as a nation. But China hasn't. I mean, China said if it has to, it will use force. But it's never emphasized that. It's never emphasized that, and I think its emphasis is on the peaceful reunification.
Right.
And that's rational to me.
Mm-hmm. Let's also talk a little bit about human rights, because you have actually said that China's notion of human rights, it should be valued in China and not disparaged by critics because a greater prosperity has led to better human rights. You wrote that it is surely perfectly reasonable to judge human rights by prioritizing the well-being of the millions over the rights of the few. You know, in the West, people generally won't like to hear that. They think human rights come from the individual, not come from, you know, the big majority. Why do you think it is perfectly reasonable in China's approach, which is greater prosperity for all, which becomes better protection of human rights?
Well, I just think that if you look at China over the last 20 years, you can see enormous rises in the standard of living, enormous rises in the confidence of the people, in the well-being of the people, in all kinds of ways. And I think that's a good thing. And I mean, if you're going to say, well, you need to stop instability, that seems to me to be rational. If you're going to, you shouldn't allow very small numbers to cause havoc for the larger numbers. And that seems to me a rational point of view. I mean, I can also see the Western point of view. It's got its reason, but I just think that the Chinese point of view is perfectly rational, and I think that China has done very well from it on the whole. I mean, you can find examples of human rights abuse, but you can find examples of human rights abuse anywhere, actually, when it comes to that. And I just think that if you look at the whole record overall, you look at it how the people have fared. China has done. I would say that China's human rights record is a good one, and I don't think that it's fair to sort of disparage it all the time and say, oh, you know, they don't treat minorities well and all that sort of stuff. I just don't think that's fair.
Finally, let's touch upon the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and Australia. We have had some rough times, uncharted waters, but some positive signs are emerging, and Chinese State Council and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said the two sides should meet each other halfway, has been seen as, opening of opportunity. Do you think Australia is now ready to take on a different approach? Do you think some lessons have been learned on either side, maybe, on how to protect our common interests and foster our relationship?
Well, look, I just think that there is hope. I think that, we had a new government this year, Labor, led by the Labor Party, and Anthony Albanese. And I think that his foreign minister, Penny Wong, is a much better diplomat than the one that she replaced, Maurice Payne. And I certainly think that Albanese is much better diplomacy than Scott Morrison, who seemed to me to go out of his way to insult the Chinese. He did that on numerous occasions, and I think that was very bad for our relationship. Now, as for what you quoted Wang Yi, I happen to agree with most of what he says. I think that the thing to do is to sit down and talk about things where we agree, which is a lot of things, not to talk about the things where we hard disagree, leave them aside for the moment, and try and come to some formula where we can agree, because there are no fundamental interests in conflict between Australia and China. I think personally that Australia is much too close to the United States. We seem to we bow down to them all the time, and I think that's a great shame. I think we should be much more neutral, and I'm not saying we should get rid of that treaty, the ANZUS treaty, but I am saying that we should downgrade it. And we shouldn't just follow the United States into all its wars. I think that there is hope for resetting our relations with China. I personally think, looking back over those 50 years that you mentioned, the relationship has been enormously productive and enormously useful for both sides, especially for Australia. If you look at the Australian economy, it's several times been saved by the trade that it has with China. It's been a very good relationship, and we should not allow it to get into disrepair. I think it is good that it should be reset. I personally am very, well, I mean, I've already said I love China. I'm not ashamed to say that. I love the Chinese people. I think that it's a very bad thing for us to have such bad relations with China, and I think we should reset it as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Well, that aspiration is shared here. Cooperation will be in the benefit of everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Colin Mackerras, Sinologist and Emeritus Professor at Griffith University in Australia.
It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. It's been
you.
our pleasure too.